I'm going to keep it simple and honest because most of us end up watching these reviews after we've already stared at a screen wondering if the price tag is worth the hype. The ASUS ROG Flow Z13 is positioned as an ultra-portable gaming laptop that can also double as a creative workstation, and that dual promise is where a lot of the confusion lives. If you're trying to decide whether this kind of machine belongs in your bag, or if you'd be better off building a desktop or buying a more conventional 15-inch gaming notebook, I want to walk you through the real-world angles that matter most. How it handles a solid gaming session, what the heat and fan noise feel like after a few hours, how the keyboard and screen actually behave when you're trying to be both a gamer and a creator, and whether the price feels justified in a market that's already crowded with high-end options. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the core of the machine, the AMD Ryzen AI MAX plus 395 processor paired with the Radeon 8060S GPU. On paper they sound like a next-gen combo, and in practice they deliver a respectable amount of horsepower for a 13.4-inch chassis. I ran a few titles that most people would consider benchmarks for a portable rig: Cyberpunk 2077 at medium settings, Valorant on high, and a quick indie workload in Adobe Photoshop. In Cyberpunk, the frame rate hovered around 4,550 frames per second on the 180Hz display, which felt smooth enough when you're not trying to push ultra settings. The game's ray tracing was off, but the rasterized performance was solid for a laptop that can fit in a backpack. Valorant was practically buttery, consistently topping 150 frames per second, so competitive players will appreciate the responsiveness. Photoshop benefited from the 32 GB of LPDDR5x RAM, letting me juggle multiple 4K assets without noticeable lag. The takeaway? The Z13 can hold its own in both gaming and creative tasks, as long as you accept that you're not getting the absolute top-tier performance you'd find in a desktop with a Radeon RX 7900 XT or a 3080 Ti. Heat is where the compact form starts to show its limits. After an hour of continuous Cyberpunk gameplay, the chassis warmed to a comfortable 85 degrees on the underside, but the fans kicked in at a noticeable 55 dB, which is louder than a quiet office but still tolerable if you're using headphones. The heat spread was fairly even across the palm rest, so the laptop didn't get hot enough to burn you, but you could feel the warmth after a couple of intense sessions. In a real-world scenario, say, a weekend gaming marathon on a couch, the fan noise will become a constant background rather than an occasional whine. If you plan to game in a shared space or a quiet bedroom, you might want to keep a headset handy or lower graphical settings to keep the fans more subdued. Now, the display. The 13.4-inch 2.5K panel with a 180Hz refresh rate is genuinely one of the most vivid experiences I've had on a laptop under 14 inches. The color gamut is wide enough for photo editing, and the high refresh rate makes fast-paced shooters feel silky. The touchscreen functionality is a nice touch for sketching or navigating Windows 11 Pro, which is the OS that ships with this model. However, the screen isn't the brightest. You'll find at about 300 nits under direct sunlight the picture can look washed out. In a typical indoor setup, the contrast is excellent, but if you often game near a window or in brightly lit rooms, you may need to crank up the backlight, which will draw more power and increase heat. Speaking of power, the battery is a real compromise. ASUS lists a 76Wh cell, but with gaming loads the laptop drains at roughly 15 W per hour. That translates to about 34 hours of mixed use, maybe a short gaming session, a few hours of video editing, and some web browsing. In real life, I found the battery life to be more of a get-at-the-outlet indicator than a day-long workhorse. If you need a machine that can last an entire day on a single charge for gaming or heavy rendering, you'll be disappointed. On the flip side, if you mostly plug in at a desk and only need the laptop's portability for occasional travel or coffee shop work, the battery life is acceptable for its class. Keyboard feel is a point that often gets glossed over in marketing videos, but it's crucial when you're typing code or pulling off combos in a fast-paced game. The Z13's one-zone RGB keyboard has a shallow travel, reminiscent of a laptop like the Razer Blade 14. The keys are quiet, with a solid tactile feedback that feels more like a chiclet than a mechanical switch. For gamers who love the click-clack of a mechanical board, this might feel a bit underwhelming, but for anyone who also writes reports or does digital art, the key spacing and low profile reduce fatigue. The RGB backlight is subtle, just a single zone that can be set to a static color or a simple breathing effect. It doesn't distract, but also doesn't offer